from one of our servers and moved to the couch. Not to punish her, just to remove myself from the room where I was no longer needed. By morning, she acted normal. Coffee, a quick kiss on the cheek, a comment about back-to-back interviews. She reminded me she'd be late, something about a strategy sync with Mark. That was his name, my co-founder. The guy I'd built the company with from a folding table and 2 laptops. The one person I trusted to run the business if I ever stepped away. Our company wasn't big. 40 employees. A cybersecurity firm that lived and died by discretion. We sold trust for a living. I was the technical director, obsessed with systems, access logs, permissions. She had joined a year earlier as HR, officially to help scale culture, unofficially because she said she wanted to be closer to what I was building. Mark had pushed for it, said it would align incentives. I agreed. I always agreed when it sounded reasonable. At the office, everything looked the same. Glass walls, low voices, Slack notifications chiming like background noise. She laughed with someone near the break room. Mark's voice carried farther than it should have. I walked past them without stopping, already late for a client call, already in my head. That afternoon, my laptop died mid-demo. I grabbed hers from the shared desk in our home office. We'd done it 100 times. Same passwords, same trust. I opened it, plugged it in, and waited. Slack came up automatically. Not a dramatic reveal. No explicit messages flashing on the screen. Just a thread already open. Their names. Her profile picture. His reaction emojis stacked under a message I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't what they said. It was how comfortable it looked. The timestamps. The inside jokes. The meeting room shorthand that didn't need explanation. I closed the laptop. Gently. Like nothing had happened. 4 days later, she stood in the doorway and asked if we were okay. I told her I was just busy. That wasn't a lie. I didn't confront her after that. I didn't reread the messages either. One look was enough to understand the shape of it. Comfort like that doesn't appear overnight. It's built. Quietly. Repeatedly. In places where it's not supposed to exist. At work, I stayed in my lane. I reviewed code, joined calls, signed off on security audits. From the outside, nothing changed. Internally, I started watching patterns instead of people. Access times. Room bookings. Calendar overlaps that didn't make sense on paper, but made perfect sense when you stopped pretending. Mark started canceling our one-on-ones. He said sales were heating up, investors asking questions, pressure everywhere. He sounded energized. Focused. He used my wife's phrases now. Same cadence. Same words about alignment and growth. It was subtle enough that no one else would notice. I did. Late one evening, one of our senior engineers, Alex, lingered near my office. He'd been with us since the early days. Quiet. Reliable. He didn't gossip. When he spoke, it was usually because something was broken. He mentioned, casually, that the finance tool had flagged an anomaly. A vendor contract that didn't exist in the system 6 months ago, but was suddenly pulling regular payments. He assumed it was part of a new sales initiative. Mark's territory. I told him I'd look into it. At home, she barely noticed me anymore. She scrolled through her phone in bed, the screen always angled away. When I left for the couch again, she didn't stop me. No question. No tension. Just relief she didn't have to explain herself. The next day, Mark called an all-hands meeting. Talked about momentum, about how far we'd come. He thanked her publicly for bringing structure to chaos. She smiled. Not at him. At the room. Like she belonged there more than I did. After the meeting, I pulled the contract Alex had mentioned. It was clean on the surface. Too clean. Generic language, vague deliverables, a consulting firm registered out of state. I traced the payment path the way I always did, one hop at a time. The address led back to a shell account. The shell account led back to someone I recognized. I didn't save the file on my work machine. I exported everything to an encrypted drive and put it in my bag. That night, she asked again if I was mad at her. I told her I was just tired. And that wasn't a lie either. Once I started looking, it stopped feeling accidental. I pulled logs during lunch, small windows of time when no one asked where I was. Badge access to the office late in the evening. Conference room reservations marked as canceled but still used. VPN connections routed through our own infrastructure, masked well enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking for intent. The Slack thread was still there on her laptop. I didn't open it again. Instead, I watched metadata. Message frequency. Reaction timing. The way their online statuses mirrored each other, even on days when their calendars claimed they were in different cities. At home, she talked about culture initiatives and exit interviews. She spoke in summaries, like she was reporting to a board instead of a husband. When I nodded, she relaxed. Silence worked better than questions. It gave people room to make mistakes. Mark stopped copying me on emails that involved money. Not everything, just enough. The vendor contract Alex mentioned turned out to be one of 3. Different names. Same structure. Same routing. The funds moved slowly, carefully, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping system. I built that system. One evening, she took a call in the other room. She laughed, low and controlled. The kind of laugh you don't share unless you feel safe. When she came back, she said it was Mark, stressed about a client dinner on the road. She said his name too easily. I didn't react. I opened my laptop and watched the dashboard refresh. Another payment cleared. The proof didn't arrive all at once. It stacked. Screenshots of financial trails. Archive logs. A copy of the shell company's registration tied to an address Mark had once joked about using for tax reasons. I didn't screenshot messages between them. I didn't need to. That wasn't the leverage that mattered. At the office, people began to treat me differently without knowing why. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Not out of fear, out of uncertainty. Mark had been positioning himself as the voice of the company. I let him. The more visible he became, the fewer places he could hide. She started dressing differently, staying later, coming home energized, then distant. When she asked if I was sleeping on the couch because of work, I said yes. That night, I backed up everything to 2 locations and locked the drive away. I wasn't collecting memories. I was preparing exits. I didn't vanish all at once. I reduced my presence until it stopped being felt. At work, I delegated what I'd always handled myself. Code reviews went to senior engineers. Vendor approvals moved to finance. I stopped correcting Mark in meetings when his numbers were optimistic. Letting him speak felt like giving him more rope. He mistook my silence for agreement. At home, I packed a bag without ceremony. Nothing dramatic. Clothes, laptop, the encrypted drive. I left the house during the day while she was busy running interviews. No note. No message. I forwarded my calls to voicemail and turned off read receipts. Not to punish. To create space where reactions could surface. She noticed the absence before she understood it. Text came first. Casual check-ins. Then concern. By the second night, her tone shifted. She asked if I was staying late. If something was wrong. I didn't respond. Silence has a way of changing the person who hears it. I drove 2 states over and checked into a hotel under my middle name. Paid in advance. Logged in through a clean network. From there, I watched. Her badge activity spiked. Late entries. Early exits. Marks matched hers almost perfectly. Their routine tightened, like they were compensating for something missing. At the office, rumors started. Not about me. About them. People notice proximity before they notice absence. On the 3rd day, Mark called. Left a voicemail about an urgent client escalation. He sounded irritated, not worried. He assumed I'd step in like I always did. I didn't call back. Instead, I filed paperwork. The divorce filing went through first. Clean. Precise. No accusations. Just dates, assets, signatures. The legal team I'd retained specialized in quiet separations. They asked if I wanted to confront her first. I said no. At the company, I initiated an internal audit under the pretense of compliance updates. It was routine enough not to raise alarms. The auditors were external. Their access was limited to what I authorized. Mark approved it without reading the scope. That evening, she finally reached me. Not by phone, by email. Long emotional. Asking where I was. Saying she felt shut out. That she didn't know how we'd gotten here. I read it once and archived it. The next morning, Mark's shell accounts were flagged. By the end of the week, I hadn't raised my voice once. But everything they relied on had started to move without them. Mark didn't realize anything was wrong until the systems stopped responding the way they always had. The flagged accounts triggered a review, and the review triggered questions. Nothing dramatic. Just routine requests from auditors who didn't know him, didn't care about his charisma, and weren't impressed by his confidence. They wanted documentation. Invoices. Proof of services rendered. He stalled. Said his team was pulling it together. I watched the delay metrics from my temporary setup. Every hour he waited made the hole deeper. The shell company's activity log told a story he'd never bothered to read. Reused IP ranges. Sloppy access times. Patterns no salesperson ever thinks about. At the office, tension started to surface. Finance asked why approvals were missing. HR asked why certain contracts bypassed review. She tried to smooth it over, stepping into meetings she wasn't invited to. That only made it worse. People noticed when boundaries blurred. She came home early one afternoon and found the house quiet. No lights. No laptop on the desk. She stood there longer than necessary, like she expected me to appear if she waited. Instead, she checked her phone. I could see the moment she realized I wasn't watching anymore. Mark called again. This time his voicemail sounded different. Tighter. He mentioned legal exposure. Said we needed to align before things got misunderstood. He still thought this was a conversation between partners. The auditors requested a meeting with the board. We didn't have a formal one. That was always Mark's argument against structure. I scheduled it anyway. Remote. Mandatory. When the call started, I joined last. Camera on. Neutral background. No greeting beyond a nod. Mark froze for half a second when he saw me. She wasn't on the call. HR wasn't required. The auditors spoke first. Calm. Methodical. They laid out the inconsistencies. The missing deliverables. The financial routing that didn't match company policy. Mark tried to interrupt. He couldn't. I didn't add commentary. I didn't accuse. I confirmed facts when asked. Dates. Access logs. Approval chains. Everything backed by records I'd already submitted. By the end of the call, Mark's role was suspended pending investigation. His access was revoked in real time. You could see it hit him when his dashboard stopped updating. That evening, she sent another message. Shorter this time, asking if this had anything to do with him. With the company. With her. I didn't reply. By the next morning, Mark was blaming her. Texting her that she must have said something. That her presence had drawn attention. That if she hadn't pushed to be involved, none of this would have happened. I never forwarded those messages. I didn't need to. The structure was already collapsing on its own. The company changed tone before it changed structure. People stopped guessing and started adjusting. Meetings shortened. Side conversations disappeared. The kind of quiet that shows up when everyone realizes something important is happening without announcements. Mark's name stopped coming up unless someone had to reference a document he no longer had access to. She felt it immediately. Her authority had always been borrowed. HR works on trust, and trust evaporates faster than access. Recruiters began looping legal into conversations she used to own. Managers asked for second opinions. She started showing up to meetings with printed notes, like preparation could replace position. One afternoon, she was asked to step out of a hiring discussion. Not publicly, just a calm request from legal to let them finish. The door closed without urgency. No one followed her. At the next company gathering, she stood near the edge of the room. Conversations shifted around her, polite but incomplete. Someone mentioned compliance updates and glanced away. Another person asked if she was still overseeing onboarding. No one waited for her answer. Mark wasn't there. His suspension had turned into distance. Distance into silence. When people asked about him, the response was the same, ongoing review. She tried to reach me that evening. Not emotionally this time. Practically. Asking what was happening. Asking what I knew. Asking if we could talk like adults. I let the call go to voicemail. The divorce papers were delivered the next morning. Not by me. By process. She signed for them without opening the envelope. It wasn't denial. It was shock wrapped in routine. At work, her access changed quietly. Certain tools disappeared from her dashboard. She emailed IT. They redirected her to legal. Legal scheduled a meeting. That meeting didn't take long. No accusations. Just determination tied to restructuring and conflict of interest. Standard language. Neutral tone. She didn't cry. She asked if Mark knew. No one answered that. By the end of the day, her badge no longer opened the doors she'd walked through for a year. She stood outside longer than necessary, phone in hand, watching people move past her like she was already part of a different story. That night, she posted nothing. No quotes. No explanations. Just silence. The next morning, Mark's attorney reached out to mine. By then, the narrative had already settled. No scandal. No spectacle. Just absence. And in that absence, everyone understood who had been removed from the center without needing to be told. She lost structure before she lost people. The mornings came first. No calendar alerts. No reason to dress with intention. She started going back to the office building out of habit, stopping across the street when she remembered her badge wouldn't work. She sat in her car longer each time, scrolling, rereading old messages, waiting for something to stabilize. It didn't. Mark stopped answering her calls. At first it was delays, then short replies, then nothing. The man who once moved money and futures with confidence suddenly treated her like evidence he didn't want attached to his name. When his attorney advised silence, she became part of that silence. Friends from work faded quickly, not out of cruelty, out of instinct. People protect trajectories. She reached out anyway. Coffee invites, check-ins. Most went unanswered. A few were polite and distant, heavy with the kind of caution reserved for people whose story you don't want to be inside. She tried family next. Conversations stayed shallow. She didn't say what happened at the company. She didn't mention Mark. She said there had been changes, that she was figuring things out. The pauses on the other end of the line stretched longer each time. I saw her once. I was back in the city for a legal meeting. Different office. Different routine. I stepped out onto the street and noticed her across the way, sitting alone at an outdoor table she used to love. Coffee untouched. Phone face down. She looked smaller. Not broken. Displaced. She noticed me a moment later. She stood. Hesitated. Took a step forward, then stopped. I didn't wave. I didn't look away either. I acknowledged her presence the way you acknowledge a closed door you don't intend to open. She said my name. Not loudly. Like she was checking if it still worked. I didn't answer. I nodded once, brief, and kept walking. That was the moment she understood the difference between being ignored and being released. That night, she sent a long message. No blame. No excuses. Just fragments of realization. She said she felt invisible. That she hadn't known when things shifted. That she finally understood how much she'd taken for granted. I read it without reacting. The company finalized Mark's removal days later. The lawsuit moved forward. Quietly. Efficiently. She wasn't mentioned in any filing. By then, she wasn't part of any structure that could protect her or hurt her. She had lost the roles that gave her leverage. All that was left was the space where I used to be, and I wasn't coming back to fill it. She finally stopped writing and asked to see me. Not to explain. Not to fix anything. Just to talk, she said. Neutral ground. Public place. Daytime. The kind of request people make when they understand leverage is gone and all that's left is proximity. I agreed without confirming a time. When I arrived, she was already there. Sitting straight. Hands folded. Phone turned off and placed carefully on the table like a gesture of respect she'd learned too late. She stood when she saw me, then stopped herself, unsure which version of me she was supposed to address. I sat down. I didn't reach for anything. Not coffee. Not water. I stayed still long enough for the silence to settle between us. She spoke first. Quietly. She said she didn't recognize herself anymore. That everything had unraveled faster than she could process. She said Mark had disappeared the moment things turned legal. That he blamed her for being visible. For being careless. For trusting the wrong person. She paused, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give one. She shifted tactics. Said she finally understood how isolated I must have felt. How she'd crossed lines without thinking about consequences. She said she never meant for it to turn into what it became. I watched her hands instead of her face. They were steady now. Too steady. Controlled. When she asked if I had known for a long time, I answered with a single nod. That was enough to change the room. Her breathing changed. Not panic. Recognition. She asked why I hadn't said anything. Why I let it go so far. I didn't explain strategy. I didn't talk about evidence or timelines. I told her I'd stopped participating the moment respect became optional. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger built from familiar materials. She asked if there was any chance of undoing what had happened. Not legally. Personally. I told her the divorce would proceed as filed. She didn't argue. She asked instead what I wanted from her now. That was the only moment I looked directly at her. I told her I wanted nothing. Not apologies. Not closure. Not effort. I stood up before she could respond. I left money on the table out of habit, not obligation. When I walked away, I felt her watching, waiting for me to turn back. I didn't. Later that evening, she sent one final message. Short. Accepting. Saying she understood now that silence wasn't punishment. It was distance. I didn't reply. The confrontation didn't end with raised voices or tears. It ended with clarity. and that was something she could never negotiate her way out of. Her collapse didn't arrive in a single moment. It came in layers. First was Mark. His case unraveled faster than anyone expected. Once auditors pulled one thread, the rest followed. Investors stepped back. Clients asked questions he couldn't answer. The confidence that had once protected him turned into liability. He stopped being the man with vision and became the man with explanations. She reached out to him when the headlines stayed quiet, but the consequences didn't. He answered once. Briefly, coldly. He told her she had complicated everything, that her presence had drawn attention, that if she hadn't mixed personal and professional lines so carelessly, he might have contained the damage. After that, he blocked her. Then came money. Severance ran out faster than she planned. Interviews didn't go well. HR has a long memory, especially when ethics are involved. She softened her resume, reframed timelines. Nothing stuck. Recruiters stopped responding altogether. Her social circle narrowed. Invitations dried up. People avoided details when they spoke to her, like the truth was contagious. She became someone others referenced quietly, never directly. A cautionary name. I heard about her through fragments. A former colleague mentioned seeing her at a networking event she didn't belong to anymore. Someone else said she'd moved apartments. Downsized. Simplified. Words people use when they don't want to say fallen. The divorce finalized without resistance. She signed everything as it came. No revisions. No demands. It was the first time she hadn't tried to negotiate. On the same day, the court approved Mark's removal from the company permanently. His equity was redistributed. His signature authority dissolved. 8 years of partnership ended in paperwork he couldn't argue with. The company stabilized. Quietly, new leadership stepped in. Trust returned the way it always does, gradually, when systems work and egos leave. She tried one last time to reach me. Not directly. Through a mutual contact. She asked if I was willing to talk. Not about reconciliation. About understanding. About what she could have done differently. The message never reached me. I'd already closed that channel. By then, I wasn't angry. I wasn't watching either. Her loss wasn't something I followed. It was something that completed itself without my involvement. She lost her marriage, her job, and the man she thought had replaced me. Not because I exposed her, but because I stopped holding the structure that made her feel secure. The collapse wasn't loud. It was total. And when it was over, there was nothing left for her to push against. Not even me. The quiet after everything settled was different from the silence that came before. This one didn't press against me. It didn't demand attention. It existed without tension, like a system running clean after corrupted files are removed. I moved back into the house alone. Not immediately. I let it sit empty for a while, windows dark, rooms untouched. When I returned, I didn't rearrange anything. I removed what didn't belong anymore. Her things went into boxes. Not with anger. With precision. The way you decommission hardware that's done its job and can't be trusted again. At the company, my role shifted. Less firefighting. More architecture. The work felt lighter without friction disguised as loyalty. People spoke plainly. Decisions moved faster. Trust, once broken, had been rebuilt without ceremony. I didn't ask about her. I didn't need updates to confirm distance. One evening, months later, I ran into her name on a document by accident. A background check request from another firm. Routine. Incomplete. It sat in my inbox for a moment before I forwarded it to legal and archived the thread. I didn't intervene. That was the last trace. There was no final conversation. No dramatic closure. No moment where she fully understood everything I'd done or why I'd done it that way. Understanding was never the goal. Respect was. People assume disappearing is weakness. That silence means you've lost something you couldn't defend. They confuse noise with power and reaction with relevance. I didn't disappear. I stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. That choice cost me a marriage. It also gave me back my time, my focus, and my position in my own life. I didn't rebuild from ashes. I stepped sideways out of a structure that had already collapsed and let it fall without me inside. Sometimes I think about the night she asked if we were okay. How close everything still looked from the outside. How much damage was already done by then. I answered honestly. I was busy. Busy preparing an exit that didn't require permission. Busy choosing distance over destruction.